Okay, let's talk a little bit about client-server networks and domains. So as the name implies, client-server requires two devices, right? We have a server device and a client device. Shouldn't be a router. Let's make that a keyboard. Looks like a Mac, right? And maybe we're joined by a switch, right? Okay. So in a client-server situation, the server provides a service and the client accesses the service. Simple enough. In a domain, we add a little bit more control over that. Now we restrict what clients can do and we have some more influence over the client environment. Right? It's a change in locus of control. Just notice that my O was capitalized there. So in a client-server network, know that the server is centralized, right? We can have things like a server that doles out files, one that does printing, or something we have experience with, a media server, right? A client is any host or node that accesses that server. So even though we use the term client, host, and node kind of interchangeably, they're really not. A client is a client when it's accessing the server, okay? Otherwise, it's a host or a peer. That's what makes the difference. The difference between a client-server network and a peer-to-peer, or the similarities, right? We might say, hey, well, in a peer-to-peer, peers serve as servers and they serve as clients. They can access information or be the source of information. Exactly, that's what a peer-to-peer does. In a client-server network, we're delegating those roles more decisively, right? We concentrate the files we need, the access we need, the media services we need to one device to which all the other devices connect, right? So servers tend to be more powerful in terms of hardware, and they tend to have static or fixed IPs. Right? So we're delineating those roles more specifically. In a peer-to-peer, everyone provides services, everyone consumes services. In a client server, only the servers provide services. Really, that's the big distinction. When we talk, when we talk about domains, right, we're adding a little bit more control over that. So strictly speaking, right there it is. A domain is a collection of devices connected under one designation or name. So domain name is broken down to a host name, the domain name, and the top level domain. For example, one you might be familiar with, right? There's the host name. There's the domain name. And there's the top level domain, right? So that's your domain. All together, that whole thing is called a fully qualified domain name, FQDN, right? So when you're inside the domain, I can get to it just by telling it the host name. When I'm outside the domain, I have to use the fully qualified domain name, right? Domains organize the access more specifically. That's their role. In a Windows domain, we're introducing a couple things, specifically a domain controller. Right? Don't know why I'm writing it again, because that's what teachers do. Right? A domain controller which provides the authority. It gives it is a database of all users and all access. So as a user, I will be allowed to see this folder, but not that one. I'll be allowed to share that resource, but not the other one. Right? That's what domain controllers do. They provide access and permission, grant permission to join the domain. Right? They are the authority, okay? Also in a Windows domain, and most other domains for that matter, we need to talk more about domain name services, right? So they translate host names, part of the fully qualified domain name, into IP addresses. That's what the DNS does, domain name services, and it's a server. It typically runs on the same thing as a DC, right? As the domain controller. Those two things together need to be working and need to be fully functional for a Windows domain to operate properly. Right? You have to have both those components, and they must be configured correctly. To join a Windows domain, it's relatively straightforward, right? It is, it requires delegation of authority. What that means is a specific account assigned to a person must approve of that device joining the domain, right? You want to keep some things in mind here. Networks versus domains, right? Just because I am on a specific network does not mean I've joined the domain. I can have a DHCP service running on a domain server or a domain controller and doling out IP addresses to devices that are not on my domain. To be a member of the domain is to have access to its resources. DHCP is merely the infrastructure. It's the road, right? I can drive down a road. It doesn't mean I get to go into every door. I have access to the road, not to the buildings on the road. There's the domain, right? So the domain might be the city, and everybody can drive on the city streets, but not everybody, unless you're part of a specific organization, not everybody can go into every door. Some doors are open to the public, some are closed, right? Domains allow that distinction to be made, right? To join a domain, all you need to do is have that delegation of authority, that account that's allowed to join the domain. You have to be joined to the network, right? Have an IP address, and then you go to control panel. And control panel is going to look something like this, right? So you have, the system icon in control panel. You're going to choose the change settings, and as the arrow suggests, you're going to go to the system properties. You're going to change the name of the PC and then the domain, and there you go. Computer name and domain name, right? So simple as that. There's a video that walks you through that on another assignment, but that's all it really takes to join the domain. The big part of it is that delegation of authority. You want to make sure you are authorized to join that domain. So again, as I said, it requires an IP address. Just because you have it doesn't mean you're part of the domain. It requires a local administrator user on the account. You need to be able to change domains on the local machine. You need the domain name, right? What's that domain called? In my case, or in the lab's case, it's CompNet. And you need account information that serves as the designated authority in what's called Active Directory, right? Active Directory is a database of users and access. Right? Those are the components you need to join a domain. So that, in a nutshell, is client and server / domains. There's way more to it than that, but this gets us started. Lets us join the domain and start messing around with what we can do with shared resources. Right? If you have any questions, you know where I'm at.